Hi, thank you so much for joining us here tonight for the opening of the Bond in Motion exhibit, the best and biggest Bond exhibit ever mounted in the United States. I'm Terry Cargus. I have the pleasure of serving as the executive director here at the Petersen Automotive. Welcome. Thank you so much. I want to initially thank our partners, Eon Productions, for all of their assistance and help for letting us use this equipment and display it. There's an awful lot of equipment down there and pieces that have never been seen before. I think you're going to be very impressed. I want to thank Ian Fleming Productions. These folks have been wonderful. A lot of great research and some really great information to share with you. And our partners, MGM. A very important partner who's been instrumental in helping us put everything together is DHL. Thank you so much, folks. Integrity Insurance, always with us. And our banker, First Republic. Also want to thank, there are two people in the audience tonight that are key people to us. I am the executive director, but I serve at the pleasure of our board of directors. With us tonight, I'd like to have you say hi. Bruce Meyer, the founding chairman of the Petersen Automotive Museum. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you so much. And Kent Pressa. Kent, thank you so much. Kent has one of the best stories I've ever heard about the automotive industry. Kent got a call one night and said, "Oh, by the way, tomorrow you are the General Motors chairman, and you're the one who's going to take it through bankruptcy." He said, "What?" He said, "Yep, that's what's going to happen." So anyway, you have to hear that. My summer job at General Motors. Also want to thank our curatorial team. Our exhibits team, curatorial group, is as good as it gets in any museum anywhere in the world. These folks are first class. They work hard. They're tireless. The research is impeccable. And I think what you'll see downstairs is something very special. Also, our IT guys, when you see what they've done with putting the film clips together and with the equipment and the pieces, the cars, the boats, the planes, it's all together. It's beautifully done. And our design team, of course, and then you'll forgive me. These folks are here tonight. They were instrumental in helping us produce this exhibit and help design it. The FGPG folks, thank you so much. I think when you see their work, they also helped us on the Hollywood Dream Machines exhibit. I'm going to get out of the way, but I want to introduce the fellow who runs our exhibit department, Brian Stevens, but also a big round of applause. We have the Bond girls here tonight. Maud Adams, Gloria Hendry, Lynn Holly Johnson, Luciana Pelusi, and Mary Staven. Let's hear it. Are the Bond girls are the best? Let me introduce Brian Stevens, our exhibits director.
Thank you very much, Terry. I feel like we should have the Bond girls up here after that. A little bit of a disappointment after that. Again, I'm Brian Stevens. I'm the director of exhibitions for the Petersen Automotive Museum, and I could not be more thrilled to welcome you here to the opening of the Bond in Motion exhibition. Believe it or not, as Terry said, this is the first official exhibit of Bond vehicles ever in the United States, which, if you think about it, the next year is the 60th anniversary of the Bond films, which means never in 60 years has there been an official exhibition of Bond vehicles in the U.S., which blows my mind. But we are absolutely thrilled to be the first place to do it, and it only makes sense that it's happening here at the Petersen Museum, and we're really, really pleased with that. Terry also mentioned that the only way we were able to pull it off was with the help of some really amazing partners. Eon Productions, they've been making these movies for 60 years. Without them, we couldn't call it an official exhibit. They sent 8 of their cars over from England, and you'll see them downstairs soon. Absolutely fantastic. MGM, Terry mentioned as well. DHL, absolutely fantastic help from them. They shipped at no cost to the museum 8 cars all the way from England via Houston to here, and they'll send them back afterwards. And as a nonprofit, that's amazing. That helps us out and allows us to do what it is that we do. And last but certainly not least, among the partners that help us put the exhibit together is the Ian Fleming Foundation. You might think They had an exhibition of 30-some Bond cars, that the majority of those cars would be in the ownership or the care of the production company. Eon Productions, maybe a subsidiary of them, maybe kept in some kind of official warehouse in England. But that would be wrong. And in fact, the vast majority of the vehicles that you're going to see downstairs are owned by a private nonprofit foundation here in the United States, in Illinois, that is dedicated to the preservation of Bond history, of Bond vehicles, etc. And they've actually become, my understanding, they have the largest collection of Bond vehicles in the world, more than anybody else, including Eon Productions. And here from the Ian Fleming Foundation, we have Mike VanBlaricum and Doug Redenius. Come on up. This is Doug, and this is Mike. Mike's the president, Doug's the archivist. They're co-founders of the Ian Fleming Foundation, and the fact that two individuals, and now it's grown to be quite a team, have come to amass the largest collection of James Bond vehicles in the world, as opposed to something that might seem more official than that, I think is pretty remarkable. And they're here to tell us their story as to how that came to be and how they came to have the vehicles and how they ended up here and all of those things. So, Doug, Mike, why don't you tell us the history?
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Brian. So as Brian said, I'm Mike VanBlaricum, this is Doug Redenius, and they asked us to tell the story of how this all started, which is kind of interesting. About almost exactly 29 years ago, Eon Productions called me. I live in Santa Barbara, and they said, "Hey Mike, do you want to buy a submarine?" And I said, "You guys know I collect books and ephemera of James Bond, right?" And they said, "Yeah, but we got this submarine that's sitting, the Neptune submarine that's sitting on the Intrepid aircraft carrier in New York Harbor. And if you or somebody like you doesn't take it, we're going to sink it, and a dive club is going to dive on it." So I said, how much? And they told us it was chump change, actually. And I said, "Let me get back to you." At that point, I had the idea of starting a 501c3 corporation. I called the two craziest bond collectors in the United States that I knew at the time, other than myself. And I called Doug, which was probably the best thing I've ever done as part of the foundation. And John Cork. Many of you know John Cork. He did almost all the documentaries on the Bond DVDs. We also, the rule was that unless all the stakeholders, all the copyright holders, that would be Glidrose Productions, now known as Ian Fleming Publications Limited, the Ian Fleming Estate, and Eon Productions agreed. If they didn't agree, we wouldn't do it. They all bent over backwards, and in fact, Ian Fleming's nephew, Nickel Fleming, said Ian would be amused. Please do it. So we went to New York, grabbed the submarine, and Doug drug it back to Illinois and restored it. And I'm going to let you tell the story about once you restored it, how it became famous. Go ahead.
Well, the interesting thing was pulling a submarine through Manhattan doesn't happen all the time. In fact, they wouldn't let me take it through the Holland Tunnel. They said, "Doug, to get it off Manhattan, you have to go across the Washington Street Bridge," which meant I had to drive all the way through Harlem, pulling a submarine. So I would stop at a stoplight, and I'd look in the rearview mirror, and there'd be literally dozens of people on the trailer trying to crawl all over the submarine. But when I finally got it back to Illinois, I live in a very small town about an hour south of Chicago, and I parked the submarine on a platform in my backyard. And lo and behold, I don't know how it ever happened to this day, but People Magazine found out about it. And in 1991, People Magazine was a big deal. And it just so happens that the episode, or the edition of that magazine that did a feature about the foundation and the submarine, was the one where Elizabeth Taylor was marrying Larry Fortinsky and Michael Jackson was the best man. So for us, it turned out to be a wonderful issue to be a part of. And immediately after that, the telephone started to ring and people were saying, well, I know where this boat is, I know where this car is. And, this was before Planet Hollywood and Hard Rock Cafe. So a lot of the value for things like that, it was a crapshoot. Nobody really knew how much some of these things were worth. So we went from owning one submarine in 1991 to today, I have found 41 James Bond vehicles, and every vehicle has its own particular story. I could bore you for hours telling you the story about each individual one, but that, in a nutshell, is how the foundation actually began.
The real, not the real, I mean, everything he told you is true. But what happened as a result of that People magazine, Reed Enterprises called us, and they were doing, apparently they do the car shows clear across the United States, and they called us and said, we saw you had the submarine, and we want to use James Bond's vehicles at the car shows for the whole year. And do you know where other things are? And we said, yes, but we're not going to tell you. And they said, how about we give you a contract, we give you some money, we go find those vehicles, we buy those vehicles, we restore those back to their movie state, and when the show's over, we give them to you. And they said, okay. For a while, 4 of those vehicles sat in our garage up in Santa Barbara. The sub has always been in Illinois. And, well, you'll see it today. It's actually, this is the really first major show the submarine has ever been at. It made it all the way across the United States. So we've been very fortunate. Some of the things were given to us, some of them we bought. Many of the vehicles, 28 of the 36 vehicles that are downstairs are nonprofit foundations owned by them. And let me add one more thing, is that Ian Fleming Foundation, as a nonprofit, which means we had to go through the IRS, is dedicated to the legacy of Ian Fleming and the popular culture that he created, which is not, of course, only James Bond, but it's also Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, which I'm going to do a show all about Chitty Chitty Bang Bang because in 2014 is the 60th anniversary of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang being written. So anyhow, we don't know Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. We're working on it. And we still have a few vehicles which Doug has found recently that need to be restored. So I just want to throw a plug in. We are a 501c3 nonprofit charity, and now that we're in the United States and not in Britain, it's a tax-exempt thing. So if you give us money so we can restore the Goldfinger jet, which is sitting in our storage room right now, we would be content. You get a tax deduction. Tell us something about at least one of those cool vehicles.
Yeah, as I said, we have 41 vehicles, and so we have a warehouse, an airplane hangar actually, back in Illinois, and the vehicles that didn't come are very large vehicles. We happen to own the Kenworth semi from the Living Daylights. License to Kill. We also, just recently, I discovered, well, you're going to see the model jet from Goldfinger in a few minutes. It's in a display case down there. And if you look closely on that little model jet, it's the scenes at Goldfinger when you see the jet flying. One side of the little model says Auric Enterprises, and the other side, they painted it to look like the Air Force jet. But they also had a full-size version of that jet. It had the taxi, it pulled into a hangar. I found that jet in a junkyard just recently down in Kansas City. The only thing that was left of it was the fuselage, the wings, the motors, the tail, everything was gone except the fuselage. So we bought 24 feet of it from the radome nose back behind the entrance door, and our plan is to restore it so children and people can go in and sit in the cockpit and get their picture taken. But one of the bonuses when I was negotiating with the junkyard owner to buy that jet, I didn't tell him it was the Goldfinger jet because we had not discussed price yet. I've learned in 40 years never to divulge anything until you're done with your negotiating. But we bought the jet at a really reasonable price. I can tell you we paid $4,000 for that 24 feet. But then he turned around and he said, well, I don't know if you know this, but he said, this is a jet Muhammad Ali chartered to go to Manila to fight Joe Frazier. So not only do we own the Goldfinger jet, but we own a little piece of boxing history as well. One thing I want to mention, getting back to the creation of the Ian Fleming Foundation, Nico Fleming, a member of the Fleming family, Ian Fleming's nephew, sat on our board of directors. And we also had John Cork, that Mike just told you about. John wrote The Long Walk Home with Whoopi Goldberg and Sissy Spacek. John is a founding member as well. But we had at one point Raymond Benson, who was approached to write what turned out to be 7 original James Bond novels. Raymond sat on our board of directors. And we're lucky enough to have his son Max and his beautiful wife Jamie here tonight representing Raymond. Max, are you in the audience somewhere here? So Max is representing his father this evening. The singular most important person to Mike and I that sat on our board of directors and was instrumental in getting the foundation created was a man named Peter Jensen Smith. Peter lived a long, healthy life until a few years ago. When he died, he was in his 90s. He not only represented Ian Fleming as a literary agent, but he also represented Agatha Christie, and he was Winnie the Pooh's agent. He worked closely with that franchise. So those of you who are wondering why I would wear this jacket this evening, this seersucker-looking white striped jacket, this was Peter's jacket. So I thought it appropriate to wear a connection to Ian Fleming at such a wonderful celebration. And Peter, to me personally, was like a father to me. So he'd be up there smiling at us this evening.
Peter was actually, again, everything Doug said is true, but Peter was Ian's agent from the very beginning. After Ian Fleming's books, Casino Royale sold immediately in England, and they got picked up in the United States, but he didn't have wasn't selling them elsewhere. And he talked to Eric Gambler, and Eric Gambler says, you got to talk to my guy. He's really good at getting stuff overseas. And he hired Peter. Peter was his agent, and ultimately Peter became managing director of Glidrose, for those of you who know who Glidrose is, which became Ian Fleming Publications Limited. So he was with Ian from almost the first year, so he knew him better than pretty much anybody. So it was wonderful to have him involved as part of this whole building Ian's legacy, which tonight we realize sitting up here that we're standing between you and 36 vehicles sitting downstairs. Most of you probably have not seen. But
before we wrap up, does anybody have any questions? We'd love to take any questions.
What's your favorite car?
Well, I guess for me, it's the Lotus submarine car. Yeah. It wasn't a secret that Lotus submarine car was sitting in the Bahamas. It used to sit there and people would drive past the taxi drivers. If you were vacationing in the Bahamas, taxi drivers would take you past the junkyard and show you and point, that was a James Bond car. I actually flew to Florida, picked up the pilot who helped design, and he drove that car underwater with a wetsuit on. His name was Don Griffin. And we went there to talk to the widow of the man who owned the junkyard. He supplied the cranes to the production company. Every morning he'd lift things, put it in the ocean, and pick it back up. So as we pulled in, the taxi driver pulled in, and we went up to the office, and the guy said, well, what'd you think of the Lotus? And I said, what Lotus? He said, well, you just passed it. And he said, it's that red car out there with the Christmas tree lights on it. So one of the world's famous Bond cars had been painted red with a paintbrush, and it had Christmas tree lights on it. So Don said to me, he said, well, Doug, he said, it is a Bond car. It was in the film, but it's not the one that I piloted. So I went from exhilaration to a little bit of depression. And then the junkyard guy said, you might as well have the other one too. So all of a sudden I was like, whoa, so okay, here we go. He walked us back into the rear part of the junkyard, and up on top of a defunct milk truck with a big tree growing up through the center of it was the second Lotus submarine car. Both of those cars are now in pristine condition, and it was wonderful that we actually found it, because people have been trying to buy it from the Roberts family for a long time.
To answer Richard's question from my side, that's a wonderful car, but my age group is a little older. The Her Majesty's Secret Service Cougar, which you'll see down there, which is just absolutely gorgeous, is one of my favorite cars. I mean, I have a lot of favorite cars. The original DB5, of course, is, people that are... I saw Goldfinger when I was 14 years old. You can do the math. And I saw it when it first came out. But the Cougar, I've laid rubber with it down an old blacktop road in Illinois. So it's a great car. Are there other questions? There's a gentleman with a mic. So let's hold. There you
go. Did most of the cars have multiples, or some of them there were just one of them?
Well, I'll quickly answer that. The early cars, there were more likely to be just one or two, whereas these days, they're likely to see many of them, like the Jaguar downstairs. You'll see there's 5 of them. That Jaguar is actually, they didn't mention it, but the Jaguar, the green Jaguar, is owned by Petersen. We also have one. And you know better than I do.
That was a good question, Bob Gale. You know all about cars. The Back to the Future car was your brainchild, so good question. I will say that Mike is correct, that there were many, many cars in production, because you can have a multi-million-dollar production and not be able to continue if a car doesn't start. We actually know, I've done all the research, I know which particular cars and boats and airplanes and submarines that we own. It's good to know what happened to all the other ones, so I'm always updating the archive to find the history behind things. Yes, sir.
Hang on until the mic gets to you.
I'll try to make it as short as possible. This is kind of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
We haven't seen the ones,
Your predecessor that was at the podium mentioned that Luciana Palooza is here.
She is.
I was 10 years old when Thunderball came out. My parents grounded me for seeing that movie. And I just want to say, Mr. Palooza, you are worth the grounding.
If you guys are willing, will the 5 Bond girls please come up? Luciana, come on out. Come on.
And also, after this, we'd like to ask the Bond girls, anybody who's acted in one of the Bond films, to make their way before everybody else over to our spiral staircase just inside, where we're going to have you cut the red ribbon and open the exhibit officially. And actually, while they're on their way up here, I wanted to mention something else that's really important to keep in mind when you go downstairs and look at these cars. Most movies today are done or made largely using CGI, special trickery, and things like that. When you go downstairs, you look at these cars and you might think that some of them didn't really do what it looks like they did in the movies. But one thing that's really amazing about the Bond cars is I think nearly every single one of these 30-some vehicles down there actually did the thing that it looks like it did in the movie. The boat that jumps 30 feet in the air, whatever it was, really did that. Am I in the way? Sorry. The AMC that jumped in a spiral over a river, there's no fakery there. It really did that. And so it's something really important to appreciate when you look at all these cars. The helicopters really flew, the airplanes really flew, it all really happened. And it's very different than a lot of other movie props that you see these days.
Related to that, basically every vehicle that's downstairs, there's a clip on a very large screen showing you how it was used. So pay attention to that. And please don't touch our cars or steal anything off of them. It happens.
Question. Do you have my Mustang and my motorcycle?
I have been looking for your motorcycle for decades, and I have no idea where it disappeared to, but it would be the crown jewel in our collection if we could find it.
It's in my bag.
Where's my submarine from A View to a Kill?
I'd like to have that as well. But we do have some things from each of your movies. So we have something from every Bond movie except 3. Nobody owns anything from Dr. No. And the current movie, No Time to Die, which you're going to see in just a few days. We have nothing from that yet. We're hoping to. But the exhibit does. Yes, the exhibit does. Now, I know you're all anxious to get down there. I'm going to hand the mic back to Mike in just a second. But here's what I want you to know. In all the years that Eon Productions, the movie company that's made the Bond movies, in all the years that they've done any exhibits we've been a part of, and I personally have been a part of them. I've sent vehicles to New Zealand, I've sent vehicles to Australia, all across Europe. I am going to tell you that nobody does it better than the Petersen Museum people. They are the most fantastic. And they're the most fantastic organization that I've ever worked with. So,
just one question. Would you be kind enough to introduce each of the Bond girls and tell which movie they were in?
absolutely, I will. Yes, of course I will. To my immediate left is Luciana Paluzzi that appeared in Thunderball. So all of you young boys that were my age back then, this is the beautiful woman then and the beautiful woman today that rolled around with Sean Connery. And next to Luciana is Mary Staven. Mary had the pleasure of being in 2 James Bond movies, Octopussy and A View to a Kill. And Mary lives here in Los Angeles, is very gracious to come join us. And next to Mary is one of my dearest friends. Her and her husband have been friends of my wife and I for many, many years, the lovely Maud Adams. Maud has the distinction of not only appearing in The Man with the Golden Gun with Christopher Lee, who Christopher Lee, by the way, was Ian Fleming's cousin, but Maud also was in Octopussy. And then the day they were shooting at Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco, Maud just happened to be walking on the pier, and her dear friend, the director, John Glenn, put her into the scene. So Maud is actually in 3 James Bond. And then next to Mike is Lynn Holly Johnson. Not only is Lynn Holly an accomplished actress, but she is an Olympic skier as well.
National figure skater.
Figure skater, sorry. I'm confusing the movie role and the figure skating. I apologize for that. Please forgive me. But Lynn Holly and I have known each other for quite some time. And then, of course, the beautiful Gloria Hendry on the end, who appeared in Live and Let Die, which was Roger Moore's very first film as well. Now, I'm going to cover myself here. If any of the other Bond actors or actresses snuck in without us knowing it, please forgive us. So we'll certainly acknowledge you if you did happen to sneak in after the fact. In closing, I just want to say my part. Thank you very much, Brian. Thank you very much, Terry, and all the hard workers at the Petersen. And thank you all for coming, too. This is the reason we do this, so thank you very much.
Let's give a few minutes for all the actors to make their way over the spiral staircase so we can have them cut the red ribbon for us. Thank you.